This is my plastic tote storage. There are many others like it, but this one is mine. My storage solution has a superpower though. It can take the high ground. So we moved into this house late this past summer, so we've been here for about 4 months. And like many of you, I needed a place to store all of our holiday decorations, which before now were strewn about a room in my basement that I have dreams of making my home gym in the near future. Luckily, I've got tall ceilings in this garage. It's almost 11 foot, so it gives me lots of opportunity to store items up high. I've noticed that some of the most risky behavior I take every year is around the holiday season. It's either getting on the ladder or climbing up and down the stairs with totes full of holiday decorations, or it's the ladder outside decorating the house. And the more I thought about it, the more I decided I didn't want to have any ladders, so I eliminated them from the equation. And this is what I came up with. Second goal is that this garage has to be able to fit 2 vehicles. Fun part about moving into a new home is learning all the little intricacies of that home. One thing that I learned in this home is that the beautiful mature trees that I have all around drop acorns, and those acorns will most definitely put a dent in the hood of your truck. I need to be able to fit 2 vehicles in this garage before next fall and the acorns start falling again. So that is a necessity. Third goal is it's got to look good. For the past 20 years, I've been moving house to house every 3 to 4 years. This is the first time I'm going to be living somewhere where I can really make a house my own. Over those 20 years, both my wife and I have come up with ideas of what our forever house is going to look like. And we want to make sure that it looks good and it fits us, because we've been dreaming about this for a while. All right, now it's time to get to the build process. Let's get badgering. Before I can hang anything, I need to get an outlet added. Right now, the garage only has outlets down low, which doesn't really help when the hoist lives up by the ceiling. So I'm adding a new outlet up high, and yes, the breaker is off. Sometimes I learn from my past mistakes. I am putting in 4 outlets so I can power both hoists and eventually the LEDs. Then I run some Romex from the existing outlet up through the wall and over to the new location. I am tapping off an existing outlet that is almost directly below where I need the higher outlet to be, which means I don't have to worry about cutting through any studs to make this happen. Once the wire is in, I pop in the old work boxes, pull the cable through, and hook everything up hot, neutral, and ground. After that, outlets go in, covers go on, and it's time to see if I missed anything up. I flip the breaker back on, test both outlets, and we're in business. With that done, I'm ready to move on to mount the hoist. I'm mounting my hoist to 2x8 framing lumber that will be mounted to the ceiling of my garage. I need to determine where I'm going to put my mounting bolts. I'm trying to get the cable to be in the center of my shelving unit and need to mark where the bolts are on the hoist so that I can avoid them when making my bolt holes. The hoist is going to hang from a pre-cut 24-inch piece of Unistrut, and I am marking it out so that it will be 3.5 inches from the wall. I know, I really need to replace these old, dull drill bits. Since this board is going to be up against the sheetrock on the ceiling, I need to drill out pockets for the washers and bolt heads so that the board can sit flush. After a quick sanding, I throw on a coat of the same color gray that I use in my workbench area on the mounting board. With painter's tape, I have marked out all of my studs and where I want all of my shelves to mount. I want to be 100% sure that I'm going to hit a joist, so I drill some pilot holes to be 100% sure. Can't be too careful. Next, I pre-drill mounting holes to prep for installation. I then place the washers and bolts in place. Now it's time to mount the brackets and strut that will hold the hoist to the board. Through trial and error, I found out that 4 stacked washers is what I needed in order to have enough room for the brackets that came with the hoist. The strut is being held on with washer, locking washer, and a nut. I'll have the bolts, hoist, and everything else that I used on the project linked below. I then secure it with a double ratchet method. And then pre-install the 3.5-inch structural screws that will mount the board to the joist. Once in place, I use 3.5-inch carpentry screws to secure the back of the board to the top of the plate of the wall. I'm not an engineer, but this seems to be a pretty stout installation so far. But just in case, I am mounting a forged shelf bracket to the studs on either end of the board. If you're stubborn like me and want to mount this hoist by yourself, I learned after many hours that this is a strategy to make it happen. I linked together a few zip ties and made the install much easier. Seriously, this thing isn't light, so you would still be better off with a helping hand from a friend for this step. Now I install the 4 bolts that mount the hoist to the bracket. If you have noticed a lot of clothing changes, it's because I do these projects in the evenings and weekends after my day job and in between kids' basketball games and activities. It's time to mount the 10-foot Unistrut that is going to act as the track for the shelving. I measure and mark locations every 18 inches and then drill holes for mounting. If your drill bit starts slowing, you can squirt a little WD-40 to cool and lubricate the process. I triple check that my struts were plumb with 2 different levels before committing and screwing them in place. For the second strut, I did the same process and added an additional check by measuring the distance between the bottom and top points. I think you could run into issues if your tracks are uneven and you could risk the trolleys that run in the tracks binding up. I have 4 trolleys for each shelving unit, 2 per track, and I'm pre-placing them for future attachment. The hoist that I purchased can lift 660 pounds in the single line configuration and 1,320 pounds in the dual line at the expense of speed. I chose the dual line configuration since speed of operation isn't a factor in my application. For my next one, I'm definitely going to move this rail a little further from the wall because I spent hours trying to get my hand back there to be able to get the bolt going to mount the lift to the rail. So, lesson learned, if you're doing this, maybe it's something you need to think about. To mount the Unistrut to the wall, I went with 2.5-inch structural screws right here to be able to put it in the wall. Before I committed to these 2.5-inch structural screws, I tried out these black flat-headed screws, and I found the structural screws rolled much better than the flat ones. You don't need to reinvent the wheel when designing tote storage. NOWhite.com has a great configurator. You put in your tote's dimensions, length, height, width, lip overhang, and lid thickness. Then you enter the rows and columns that you need. Look, it even gives you a little picture. The only deviation that I made to my application is that I added 2.5 inches to the length, because I need a little extra room for the top shelf to avoid the hoist. And it gives you the full cut list, including the total foot length and number of screws needed. To lift my storage unit, I need to build a sled that will attach to the back and add some additional stability. To assemble, I drill some pocket holes and attach everything together with wood glue and screws. I'm not taking any chances, so I'm adding extra glue and screws wherever I can in this project. Don't judge me too harshly. I don't have a suitable workbench to build this thing on, so I'm going to make do with these busted old sawhorses. I'll have to add a large workbench to my list of future projects. I'm pretty certain I used a whole bottle of wood glue for this project. In this phase, also used a lot of pocket screws. I'm using a 2x6 at the top of my sled where the bolt that the hoist will attach to will be placed. Alright, now it's time for assembly. Now if you use the NOWhite configurator, it'll tell you exactly how far down the top runner has to be. For me, that's 3 inches, so I'm going to measure that out. And more wood glue and screws. NOWhite has detailed videos on how to configure and assemble the standard tote storage, and I will identify the few places that I deviate from that plan in this project. I'm using 2x4 spacers that make assembling each of these much easier. As I work to continue to keep Gorilla Glue in business, please take a second to like and subscribe. I have a lot of great ideas for future projects, and it would mean a lot for your support. Hell, if I get enough subscribers, I might even upgrade this potato of a camera. So here's where we're going to deviate from the standard configuration. Since my storage is going to be hanging from its back, I need to beef it up so it doesn't fall apart once I start loading it up. My plan for this is to have diagonal runners for either end and one in the middle, going from back, rear, of course it's back rear, going from the top of the back to the bottom of the front. I'm not an engineer, let's see how it flies. You can try to do the geometry that you learned in high school for this step, but I found that laying the board out and marking it with a pencil was the easiest method. Due to the magic of editing, you don't get to see the times where I'm trying to do the math unsuccessfully. Learn from this badger. Each of these diagonal supports gets a pocket hole in each end and as many screws and glue as I can get on it. And, just for good measure, I toe in a screw at each end. And now to put it all together. I had to measure a few times before I got the spacing just right to make sure that I had enough room between each column for the plastic tote to fit. Using the clamps to keep the runners in place is definitely something I would recommend if you were going to take on this project. Other than the pocket screws, the rest of this tote storage is put together using star-bit 2.5-inch construction screws, and a lot of them. I will link them and all of the other items I used on this build down below. It's time to attach the sled that will attach to the back of the storage unit and act as the anchor for the hoist to attach to. Here is another deviation from the Anna White configuration. I am adding cross beams to add a little strength and also to have a place for the plywood to ultimately attach. The frame is assembled, and now I need to mark the locations for the trolleys that will ride inside of the Unistrut and pre-drill the holes for the lag bolts that will hold them on. I'm using a 3/4 inch drill bit to make the hole for the eye hook that the hoist will hook onto. The hook that I'm using is good for up to 2,000 pounds. I can't say for certain that the rest of the structure is good enough to put that to the test though. Another part of this project where I would have saved a lot of time if I would have gotten some help. To attach the 4 trolleys to the frame, I am using 1/4 inch by 2 inch lag screws with locking washers. I didn't have enough room to use a ratchet back here, so I would recommend using a ratcheting wrench if you have one. Smartest man alive! Yes, seriously, this is the most scientific test I can come up with at the time. I am pumped. It's so excited to be able to have an idea that you think might work and actually see it come to fruition. This is huge. I'm so excited. Now, I just need to do it all over again with one more shelf. I know, the hand cover is a YouTube cliche, but let me have my turn with it 10 years too late. Alright, it's plywood time. The only plywood you really need is for the top as a shelf if you are building yours like mine. I decided on the bottom piece for some added rigidity and to have a surface to paint and mount my LED strips to. I didn't video it, but I also cut a piece of plywood to go on the outside edge of the exposed shelf on my right-hand shelving unit. I am using my plunge router with a 3/4 inch bit to make a 1/2 inch deep groove for my LED channels to go into. Now I need to notch out an area around where my eye bolt is located. That's right, more wood glue. I'm attaching the plywood with glue and 1-inch brad nails. Using my 3/4 inch chisel, I quickly square off the ends of my LED channel. Now onto the plywood that goes on the bottom of the unit. I complete the same steps, starting with routing out the channel and installation with glue and brad nails. To get an idea of what the starting weight of these units were. The 3-column unit on the right comes in at 240 pounds, and the 4-column unit on the left is about 270. This leaves me a theoretical 1,000 pounds of payload based on the Hoist's maximum.
So I guess I own a crane scale now. I suppose it could come in handy when I'm fishing.
I've done a few projects over the years, but I've never done edge banding before. I'm installing banding on all exposed plywood edges. Don't tell my wife I'm using my iron for this. In the home stretch now. Time to throw on a coat of steel gray paint to match the rest of my garage. I told myself that I didn't need to paint the rails because the paint would rub off when I put the totes in. But in reality, I really didn't want to climb inside to paint every nook and cranny. I think the end results work out when it's all loaded up. I'm installing aluminum channels for my LEDs into the plywood. I scuffed up the bottom of each of the channels with sandpaper so that the glue would have a place to grab onto, and I glued them into place with non-expanding clear Gorilla Glue. I used a 1/4 inch bit to make a hole for the wires to pass through. I'm using the same BTF cob lighting that I've used elsewhere in the garage that puts out some great looking light. I cleaned out the aluminum channel with alcohol, and the LEDs are easy to apply with their self-adhesive. Make sure you only cut these at the marked locations that are every 3 or so inches. I needed a place to hide the power block and LED controller, so I put together this box from plywood scraps and mounted it to the wall with sheetrock screws. Looking back, I would have skipped this step since the only time I can see this is when I am loading the shelves up. Next, I attached a 2x4 block so that I have a place to mount the drag chain that will house the LED wiring going down to the shelves. Then I mounted it again when I found out it blocked the shelf from getting to the height that I wanted. I drilled a few holes for the wire to come out, and then I screwed in my drag chain. I used my Bamboo 3D printer to print out these chains in PLA, and I am impressed with how they turned out. I then installed the block at the back of the shelf to mount the chain at the bottom. I could have come up with something more elegant, but at this point in the project, I was looking to wrap it up. Once again, I can only see it when I'm loading the shelves. My LED channels come with a plastic diffuser that snap easily in place. If you need to cut the cover, I recommend using household scissors. Then, I run my LED wire down from the controller through the drag chain and install the holding clips in place. I do a little bit of cable management, and then I solder the lower LEDs to the upper LEDs and the cord from the controller. And then I wrap it up with some electrical tape. It was a little tricky soldering in the shelf, but it was easier when I remembered that I could just move the shelf to a better height. To wrap up the lighting, I climb on top of my shelf and plug in the power brick, and then plug in the wires going to both shelves into the WLED controller. I have them wired where I can control each shelf individually if I choose. Finally, I just jam it all into the plywood box. Let there be light! I had to standardize the random assortment of totes that I had before so that they were all the same size for my storage rack. I took this opportunity to change to clear totes so I can see the contents. I'm using yellow tops for Halloween, red tops for Christmas. The Christmas ones are currently empty because Mrs. Badger is covering most of the interior surfaces of the house with red and green decorations. Let's see how long I can keep up this organization method. Here is what the lighting looks like tied into the LEDs that I have installed near my workbench. For the most part, I'm going to keep these on white, but it wasn't much more expensive to have the RGB option for a little fun.
Alright, I'm calling this project done. I achieved all the goals that I wanted coming into this project. 1, I don't have to get on a ladder to get the totes in and out for the holidays. 2, both cars should be able to fit in here. And 3, I think it looks great. Now, the LEDs, I admit, they're a little bit extra, but they're fun, and they match my workshop portion over here. I gotta keep myself from playing with it because it's pretty fun, and my kids are consistently asking for rides. I guess that's a downside when you do a project like this. One thing I did think about, my kids are old enough that I don't need to worry about it, but if your kids are really little, something you can think about doing is 1, have the controllers out of easy grabbing distance, or 2, put a smart switch at the top where you can deactivate it and then not be able to turn it on and be able to keep the control. So this project was fun, and I'm super excited about how great it turned out. Remember, if I can do this, so can you. So until next time, Badger out.
Hey, you want a treat? Sit. What? No. Sit. Jump. Good girl. Sit. Lie down. Okay, good girl. Good girl.